Today, we are unwrapping the secret science of chocolate. And trust me, the real story behind your favorite treat is way more complex, and honestly, a lot more amazing than you probably think.
I mean, you've probably had chocolate hundreds, maybe thousands of times in your life, right? But what if I told you the entire flavor, that thing you call chocolate, is actually built on a pretty well-kept secret?
And right there, that's the secret. That rich, iconic taste we all know and love. Well, it doesn't just grow on a tree. Nope, it has to be carefully, deliberately made through a process that's part ancient craft and part some seriously cool science. So let's dive right into the central mystery here, what you could call chocolate's flavor paradox.
Okay, so here's the first kind of mind-blowing fact. If you were to just walk up to a cocoa tree, pick a pod, and bite into a raw bean, you would not taste chocolate, not even close. You'd get this super bitter, astringent flavor. Basically, without the next steps, these beans are pretty much useless for making chocolate.
And that's the big question, right? The question that the entire chocolate industry is built on. If the flavor isn't in the raw bean to begin with, how on earth do we get it? Well, the answer is all in one crucial and often forgotten step.
And that answer is fermentation. This is the incredible, transformative process that unlocks all the potential that's been hiding deep inside that bitter little bean.
So fermentation has two really important jobs to do. First, a practical one. It kills the bean so it doesn't try to sprout into a new tree. But the second job, that's where the real magic happens. This is the secret we're talking about. It kicks off this amazing chemical chain reaction that creates the molecules that will eventually become the flavor of chocolate.
Now, this whole process isn't just some sterile thing that happens in a lab. It's a craft, and it's been refined for generations, and the different ways of doing it lead to totally different results. You know, depending on where you are in the world and how big the farm is, chocolate makers generally use one of two main methods to ferment their beans. It really comes down to a choice. Are you going to make a giant pile, or are you going to use a structured box? Each path creates a totally different starting point for the final chocolate. So on one hand, you've got heap fermentation. This is really common for small farms. They just pile the beans up and cover them with banana leaves. It's a bit of a slower, more natural process, and it tends to create a less acidic, kind of earthier flavor. But then you have the box method, which you'll see on huge plantations. Here, the beans are put into these big wooden boxes, and they're turned every day. That gets a lot more oxygen in there, which helps different microbes do their thing and creates a much brighter, more acidic flavor.
Okay, so we've seen the craft. Now it's time to pull back the curtain and look at the actual science. And it's not just a simple reaction. It's more like a perfectly choreographed three-part chemical ballet.
So, Act 1 starts outside the bean, in that sweet, gooey white pulp that surrounds it. Wild yeasts, just floating around in the air, are drawn to all that sugar. And just like when you're brewing beer or making wine, they start eating the sugar and, you guessed it, producing ethanol, which is alcohol.
Then comes Act 2, the switch. A whole new crew of characters shows up, bacteria. They take over from the yeasts, and they start eating the alcohol that the yeasts just made. Their waste product? Acid. And this reaction generates a ton of heat, causing the temperature of that whole pile of beans to just skyrocket. And this, right here, is the climax of the ballet. That intense mixture of heat, alcohol, and acid finally punches through the bean's tough outer shell. This kills the bean, which is what we want, but more importantly, it causes the cell walls inside to break down, unleashing this flood of powerful enzymes.
This release of enzymes, this is the whole point. This is the exact moment where the raw, untapped potential for chocolate flavor is finally forged into something real.
What's being created here are things called flavor precursors. And I just love this analogy. Think of it like cake batter, right? The batter itself doesn't taste like a finished cake, but all the ingredients are in there just waiting for the heat from the oven to transform them. That is exactly what flavor precursors are for chocolate. So what are these enzymes actually doing? Well, they're like these tiny little molecular scissors, and they're snipping apart all the big, complex proteins inside the bean into their most basic building blocks, amino acids.
And they make a whole bunch of them. We're talking about 20 different kinds of amino acids being formed during this process. And each one is like a unique little Lego brick, absolutely essential for building that final complex chocolate flavor when it's time for roasting.
For example, the research points to a couple of key players, like valine and glycine. These two, among a few others, are the superstars. You gotta have them.
Without these specific little molecules being created during fermentation, you simply would not get that classic chocolatey flavor later on. They're the missing pieces of the puzzle.
All right, so let's bring this all home. Let's connect all this secret science back to the actual bar of chocolate you might have in your kitchen right now.
The ultimate secret of chocolate is this. That flavor you love so much doesn't really come from a plant. It's actually created by an invisible army of microbes, a wild, spontaneous fermentation driven by yeasts and bacteria all working together in perfect harmony.
And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. This quote from the research just says it all, plain and simple. Correct fermentation is essential to produce a good flavor in the final chocolate. It's not just an important step, it is the most important step.
So, next time you unwrap a bar of chocolate and you break off a piece, just pause for a second. Remember, you're not just tasting a bean from a tree, you're tasting the end result of a wild, delicate chemical ballet, a collaboration between farmers, yeasts, and bacteria. So the question is, will you be able to taste the science?